Everything now will be deleted unless you agree otherwise. So thank you for the time, Amin. Looking forward to your insights today. This is going to be a very good time together. This is the first Saturday roundtable, and I think this is a very good idea. So over to you, my friend.
Thank you. So welcome to our roundtable today. We're going to discuss neuroplasticity and communication in leadership. We're going to try to unpack parts of my leadership model, which is C.R.A.V.E, stands for communication, respect, authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy. Today, we're going to focus on communication. So with communication, that is something that's key, not only in leadership, but in everything we do as far as life. If we want to be successful, we have to be able to communicate effectively. So before we get into the communication piece, I want to put out there this. Let's look at the concept of neuroplasticity and how is it relevant to leadership. So let's start there. Let's start that discussion there.
To be an effective leader and to being able to understand communication, possibly deficits or how to improve communication, that's your first task as a leader, because you're not only communicating to possibly one individual, you need to be able to communicate to a myriad of differing individuals. And that's what makes it so unique, is we are individualistic. And so knowing how to communicate to your audience is I think, one of the most fundamental attributes of an effective leader. And so understanding neuroplasticity and how we can change our brain is plastic. Neuronal tissue is the most plastic piece of the human body. And we all know, if we look at a spectrum of plasticity, bones are going to be that least plastic, and neuronal tissue is going to be the most plastic. And so what we're doing right now, our neurons are constantly changing every second, every millisecond, even through those comfortable situations, but most especially during those uncomfortable situations. And so what we're doing right now, and what we're hopefully going to be teaching others, is the way that we learn and the way that we grow is through those uncomfortable situations, and hopefully we can reap the benefits of it.
Add something, I totally agree with you, Cody. It's really important. On a more simplistic level, though, I still find a lot of leaders are not familiar with the concept of the platinum rule, which is, they know the golden rule, treat others like you want to be treated, but they don't know the platinum rule, like treat others like they want to be treated. And to communicate effectively, you need to meet people where they are and what their preferences are, which requires a lot of agility, or should require agility, and the neuroplasticity that supports that.
Dr. Amin,
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. Dr. Amin, I'd like to go sort of to the penthouse, right to the top. And in North America, if you look at the scorecard of a CEO, that's a performance plan. That's usually set by their board, or if they don't have a board, it's set by an advisor or someone else. Owning culture of an organization starts with the CEO. And so I think this topic is very relevant in my years of experience at that level. The culture is a problem across the organization, and one of the biggest challenges for CEOs is being able to be seen as real, being able to be relatable, and being able to be trusted and connect, and then articulate and start that culture. Two other quick thoughts I want to throw out to that before I talk about neuroplasticity. One is, in the work I do teaching leaders, some communications, I think it's a North American study, but over 85% of people who left jobs either were fired or left organizations in the last 5 years is because of communication issues. It's not pay, it's not anything like that. It's the inability to talk to somebody else effectively, have a relationship. And then the last one, which is my favorite, is blind spots, because I had many when I was a leader. The blind spot, there's direct correlation between the blind spot of the leader and the performance of the organization. And so many of us have been developed, particularly me, from understanding blind spots from a behavior point of view. Coach says, "Hey, Tom, we observe you do this. Now we need to shift and change that." I think neuroplasticity is a breakthrough because now you're going to go inside my brain and find out why, and then rewire the neural pathways, create habits. And I'll finish with this. People ask me what the role of a leader is. The number one job of a leader is to create other leaders. So if you can't communicate, you can't rewire yourself to be effective, you can't develop other leaders.
Tom, you're hitting the nails right on the head there. As we're talking about communication as a leader, in the environments that I work in, their kitchens are high stress environments, right? And my role is to grow leaders in high stress environments. So we talk a lot about authenticity, we talk a lot about intentionality, we talk a lot about focusing on your gaps, right? You have to be introspective of yourself to see where your gaps are. But authenticity and intentionality mean nothing if you're not bringing integrity and emotional intelligence to the game, right? And if you can't recognize those areas in yourself and then bring those forward when you're leading your teams in effective communication, you're never going to get anywhere, right? You said about that study, there's that quote that people don't leave jobs, they leave leaders, right? They leave their bosses because, to your point, they're not being communicated with effectively, and they're not being given the opportunity to express themselves effectively, right? Communication is a two-way street. They have to be able to communicate back and feel like they have a safe space where they can speak about the things that are important to them and recognize the gaps in both areas.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm a big fan of Hell's Kitchen UK and was just watching it, and they get rid of people out of the kitchen instead of trying to fix them.
That's a little bit different. So in this discussion, I've been taking notes from just keywords of what you all have stated. Tom, I really love those three major things that you brought up. A leader needs to know their blind spots. How are you going to be better? How are you going to grow if you're not able to really have the self-reflection time and get able to receive feedback from the people that you're leading so that you know what your blind spots are. That is so key in what we do as leaders, that if we don't do that, you're going to be seen not only not relatable, but also a person that doesn't listen to their people. And that's when you lose people. So that was very something that really hit home for me. Liz, in what you said, meeting people where they are. So especially what we've undergone through in the last 3 to 4 years with this great pandemic, whatever you want to call it, and not being able to meet people where they are. This is why every industry is really struggling and keeping their top talent. You can't keep top talent if you can't meet them where they are. For example, if you have a single parent, when you have a single parent as one of your key people, you have to be able to be a little flexible in that some days they're not going to get to work. Some days they're going to get to work later because they have that struggle of kids don't want to get up, kids are not feeling well. There's a lot of things going on in their life because there is one person playing two roles at home, which ultimately affects them at work. So meeting people where they are, it's very, very vital to being successful. Cody, when you talked about uncomfortable situations, wow, that's where people grow. And that's where the plasticity really starts working for us, because when we're put in uncomfortable position, now we have to figure it out. And that's where really truly where people grow. Dr. JJ, is there anything you want to add on to that topic?
Oh, now you've opened the can of worms there.
Absolutely. You thought I wasn't going to bring that up.
Oh, no. I mean, I want to dive into your thinking. I'm really interested to hear about how the Crave model makes sense. I'm sure you've heard this before, but I really crave to understand how leaders can improve their communication skills. So I don't know. Give us a bit of context around your work so we can dive into it a bit. I'm really curious to hear more.
That's a great question. So, being a leader and executive for many years, I love to read, but I also love to write and research and look at, okay, if we try this, how does it affect the workflow? And do you actually get the results that you're looking for? So in my many years, I decided to really take notes of everything that I was doing. And as I was doing that, experiencing it, I was also reading a lot. And in doing that research, it really just showed that in order for a leader to be effective and an organization to be effective and successful, they have to be about something. There has to be values. Leaders are, they have their personal values, and organizations need to have values. And when you get the leaders' values matching what the organization values are, home run. That's how you win. And that's how organizations win. So in doing that, I was like, okay, well, let's look at certain values. What values are important? What are the ones that can make or break an organization as well as a leader? And that's how my Crave model came about. So I talk about communication as the most important thing. The way a leader communicates to its people is key in order for the organization to be successful, because you have to be able to reach, whether you have an organization of 10 people or an organization of 10,000 people. And how do you do that? The way you communicate. And communication is not just verbal, it's those non-verbal cues. What you do, the way you walk into a room. People look at all that, the way you express yourself. When someone says something wrong, do you automatically frown, sit back, cross your arms? All of that is important for a leader. So communication becomes a vital, and that's why I start all of my trainings, and my leadership model starts with communication. So, and speaking of that, why don't we move along to more of the science of it? How does communication affect the different brain regions? So we look at, the different, when communication is happening, there's different brain regions that are effective. The prefrontal cortex, Broca's area, the auditory and visual processing centers, the visual processing centers. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I'll take
I just,
a swing at it.
Blah,
Okay, go
blah,
ahead.
blah, blah.
go ahead, Cody. I can jump in after you.
So this is where I start to geek out on things. My background is I was first really into muscle and trying to figure out how the brain connects to our muscles. And so as I was ending my PhD and getting into the dissertation, that's when I really started to focus on plasticity and neuroplasticity, especially when I started looking at neuromuscular physiology. And so one of the things where I started to really get passionate about was looking at the history and how we started to figure out the different regions of the brain and how they play a role in our communication. And if we go back to the mid 1600s, we had a French, he was an anatomist, but he was also a soldier physician that was on the front lines during war. And he kept seeing head wounds and how they translated to communication challenges. They'd have a soldier with a right prefrontal cortex injury, but it was affecting their contralateral or their left side of their body. And so while that's a tangent away from what we're trying to get at, is we're constantly learning of how we learn. And I know that's such a rudimentary phrase, but it is true. To be able to effectively communicate, we need to learn how do we learn and how do we individually communicate. And so the different regions of the brain and how we coordinate those or communicate with those has taken a turn. And it went from that French anatomist to looking at phrenology, and now we know phrenology is not true, and now we're accepting Brodmann's area. And so the different regions of that brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, it is associated with decision making. We know now that it is associated with executive function, looking at what is good versus bad, deciding on what is better versus best. And so if we go back to all of those standardized tests that we've probably taken, please choose what answer is most best or better than everyone else. And if you look back, those are for me, the uncomfortable situations, because, well, they all sound great, but which question or which answer is the best? And so for me, that's how I started remembering or getting involved in the different areas of the brain. But no, they all play a significant role, especially that hippocampus. And it's interesting how each one of us probably has a different hippocampus setup, or how we retrieve memories, how we retrieve what communication works best for us, and how we effectively communicate that back to our team.
Thanks, Cody. I'd like to just share a story of a gentleman I was coaching. I will call him Mr. D. And Mr. D, the situation was I was called by the company who I knew to come in and coach this fellow, and I was told that they were at the point of firing him, and he communicates and yells at people. So I sat down and we had a conversation, and the first thing that struck me is this is a really nice person. They're wonderful, and they were previously in a very senior role and very successful. So I started understanding, when we were having conversations, he was displaying verbal and nonverbal habits of nerves and fear. I could kind of read that through him. What came out of this, applying neuroscience, is we discovered that in his early years, his childhood, he was a child of maltreatment. He had quite a big story, and his brain wasn't developed effectively. I was able to show him, using actually a brain model, the part of the brain where there's emotions, the amygdala, and I was able to show him that and give him some research that, and I'm a child of maltreatment, so I come from that background, addicted parent, that the system in the brain that manages stress cannot develop effectively if we're coming from that type of early development, and that can then manifest into leadership in the future. What he was really stuck on is he didn't understand why he just lost it and yelled at people. He'd be having a conversation, he would just hammer people. So I showed him this. I just want to finish with this, that this was explained to me in my therapy. I went into mental health therapy because of my concussion, particularly for depression. And they explained the prefrontal cortex, and the doctor stood up in front of the room and said, okay, this is your brain, and it sits on top like a hat. And sometimes it can get disengaged, and therefore we can lose our temper. We don't pause and think about our thoughts. We don't use that part of the prefrontal cortex to rationalize, does this serve me well? What's the emotion? And they told me that this is where that term flip your lid comes from, where you kind of just flip out, which is really a cool way to show it. So by helping him understand that, we the last part of the story, which is phenomenal because we changed him, was to understand that the anger and the frustration wasn't coming from what he was taking in from the outside world. So when he was with an employee, it wasn't necessarily what the employee was doing in the conversation. It was actually, you take in maybe a small percentage of what you see on the outside world. I think there's something like 11 billion bits of data you look at, and you take in maybe 5%, 10%. So he said then, so we helped him understand that the story he's making up in his head is actually coming from his past, and then he projects that out. Here's where the transformation happened. He said, how do I change? I said, well, we're going to do it differently. We're not going to use behavioral things like you have to be good and you have to, affirmations, all that. We said, we're going to actually rewire those pathways, give them exercises and relearn. So, meditation, deep breath, sleep, all these things. And remarkably, about a month, 2 months into the coaching, his boss called me and said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's working. And so this all started by helping him understand that how he was showing up as a leader wasn't necessarily what was happening because of the outside world. It was the anger was really in him, and he had to make some changes from a very different point of view using this neuroscience.
That's
Thanks,
a
Doctor.
wonderful strategy. Can I hop in here? I'm sorry, Dr. Kennedy. Can I hop in?
Rock and
Okay.
roll.
So it's fascinating what you brought up, Tom, about how not being treated correctly during your formative years can lead to these types of discrepancies or deficiencies when trying to communicate. There's also, and I'm not going to take up the whole time here, but there's a wonderful story with Phineas Gage. And if you've ever heard of Phineas Gage, okay, so everybody's nodding. All right. That is where you have a physical discrepancy come in and ruin that pathway. But that is another wonderful area where we can learn from. So I won't take up any more time, but if anybody wants to learn more, definitely look it up.
I want to tell my Phineas Gage story. If you look carefully over here, you can all see there's a bit of a dent. And I was in a road accident, and clearly the stories that dented my head, which led me into a coma. And the rest of it is pretty much a dark story. But the you can hear I'm still stumbling words sometimes, especially when it gets emotional. But when I was coming out of the coma, I noticed that how difficult it was to find the language, because the Broca area was relatively well damaged, and the association with the emotional center is so close. And the problem with the brain / the benefit is that it is an emotional organ, and we can get lost in the neuroanatomy, and clearly the anatomy is important, otherwise our language centers wouldn't have been damaged. But as Liz would know on the fundamentals course that we're doing, is that the neurotransmission around the different areas of the brain is really important. And we've been looking at the key neurotransmitters involved in communication. And we've been looking at how the neurophysiology informs neuroplasticity. And in the NPN Hub, I think, Tom, you were on the call. I'm not sure if you were, Liz, but we had a roundtable with Michael Merzenich. And if you don't know his name, please Google it, because he kind of was the guy who showed that adult neuroplasticity is real. And having him on the NPN Hub discussing this with us just validated all the evidence that I went through of rebuilding those pathways and how important that is. The point that I'm trying to make for leadership is that leadership is emotional, and we need to respect the fact that the software of the brain is built on an emotional platform. It's basically kept us alive, that whole fight and flight and freeze thing. But if we don't know how to engineer how the brain shows up, the mind is going to go all over the place. So I'm really eager to I really crave, I can't stop myself. I really crave to learn more about about the science behind your work. I mean,
So I think Liz wanted to jump in there. She was typing away, giving some tips and Tanner as well. So if you guys want to jump in,
I'll just make I think what Joji just said is like so important to concentrate on, is because the brain is an emotional organ. And until recently, so many business leaders want to be just the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And not acknowledging that emotion, and not acknowledging the fact that you don't want to stifle your emotions, because that too can cause more problems for you physically and mentally. But at the same time, you do need emotional regulation, because you need to lead by role model and not have everything blow up in front of you. So it's a delicate balancing act.
Absolutely. That's where the emotional intelligence piece and the emotional maturity comes into play for leaders. One of the things that I really try to hammer home with leaders, if they want to get to that next level, is really look at the components that make up your emotional intelligence. Well, what is it where are the areas where you need to grow? And one of the biggest pieces for leaders is the emotional maturity. And when we look at that, is are you able to handle situations that are very uncomfortable? Whether that is that you're under a lot of pressure, and are you able to take that information in, really look at, okay, this is the issue at hand. How do I break it down into the different pieces so that I can then speak on that to my teams, but in a way where I am not speaking down to them, that I'm not being like Tom's client, hitting them upside the head with it. How do you share that information in a thoughtful manner where you can get the best out of your people? And that's where that emotional maturity is so important. I know Tanner and myself speak about that all the time.
Dr.
Yeah.
Mina, just what a quick question. If somebody isn't emotionally mature, uh, I use a personality assessment done by a Dr. Taylor Hartman. It's based on motive, and there's about 50% of people in that framework that he suggests aren't emotionally mature. And I would put my wife and I talk about this all the time because I'm verbose. I never shut up, and she's blunt and to the point. But she can't feel emotion, and she's kind of void of it. And I've had to learn to love her in different ways, not expecting her to hold my hand. It's like, what's that? So this guy I was coaching, he's like that. He just doesn't have that emotional maturity. He doesn't know how to show it. I was just curious what you might do with something like that to try to teach them on how to be more mature emotionally. If they're not
can I
wired
jump
that way.
in here before you do that, Tom? And I'll tell you, this is a very intelligent group of people, and I thought it might be interesting to preface your question, Tom, if we're speaking about the neuroscience of emotional intelligence. It would be interesting to throw a cat amongst the pigeons and see if this is interesting, okay? Because is it emotional intelligence or is it felt intelligence? Are we speaking about how the emotional surges occur neurologically, or are we speaking about the felt experience that I'm having when I'm angry? So maybe it's a linguistic dialogue, but when I read the literature, I read emotion as core neurophysiological affective with an A events that permeate through the brain. Okay, when that information hits the prefrontal, we then have awareness of it, and we have a felt experience of conscious awareness in response to that. So that emotion then becomes a felt experience, a feeling, if you like. So
Yeah.
the cat amongst the pigeons, Tom, and maybe this is off-piste, and I'm happy to go back in my box, is, are we speaking about felt intelligence or feeling intelligence, or are we speaking about emotional intelligence of the leader? Emotional intelligence of the leader would be the ability to catch those immediate triggers. There's, according to people like Ekman, there's about 4 or 5, maybe 6 of them. But if you get into feeling intelligence, there's a billion different feelings, maybe not a billion, but well into the hundreds. So what is the conversation that we're having, Tom? Feeling intelligence,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, or is it the wrong question to ask?
No, I'm right with you. I'm right with you. So in my mind, what I was thinking of is it's a combination of both. I really believe leaders, anybody leading or communicating has to be able to do both. So in the case of that gentleman I was referring to, sitting in a room, can he feel? Can he see the other person sinking in his chair? Can he feel that experience? He couldn't. And the other one was the second part, JJ, which you said, which is about catching in his own self the triggers. So I was talking about both, but yeah, I don't know how you can teach that, because with him, I couldn't teach him how to feel when I was feeling down. I couldn't teach him that. So what I had to do is actually get him to go out and observe people and then have conversations about it. And I would say to him, if I may be wrong here, but this is how I coach him. I said, okay, if I'm sitting in front of you and we recorded it and I'm like this, sinking in my chair, that's a marker. So that when you see that, here's what you do. You say, hey, Tom, this is getting heavy. How are you doing? That kind of thing. So anyway, back to you, Dr. Min.
So I'll Dr. JJ took us down a rabbit hole there for a second. I'll try to climb out of it. So one of the things that I've done, I've had that situation numerous times in my career. One of the things that I love adding to that, when you have a leader that, and I'll speak to the emotional intelligence piece of that, is speaking on the terms of empathy. How do you put them in situations of, why don't you try someone else's shoes on and see what that feels like? Walk in their shoes. Get to know those people, see what their personal lives is about, and you'll understand a little bit more of why they do what they do. And that's where then you will be able to start evoking some type of emotion, something to get them to realize, wait, hold on a second. Maybe this person is not bad after all. It's just a situation that they are in. For example, 2 weeks ago, I had an incredible conversation. So I have a non-for-profit organization that wants us to use their young kids. So this non-for-profit organization, what they do is that they take kids that are in really bad situations, high school kids. They come from broken homes, homeless. They have no one that they can look up to. They have zero role models, and this group is taking them on, providing a safeguard for them, but teaching them that, listen, there's other things in life that you can look up to. You don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to go down that path. You can actually do something with your life. And that for me evoked a lot of emotions. And then I spoke on my personal experiences and what I've done in the past. So in my past, I ran those programs where you take this inner city kids that they don't have the right upbringing. So I was lucky that I had incredible parents. We went through some I mean, really hard situations, but we did it as a family. And I always had my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister. Some of these kids have nothing. So when you have someone in a workplace, when you're a leader and you have people that you see them that they're just doing things that are not right, find out why. It could be that, you know, they're struggling. They probably, you know, come from a broken home. They don't know any better. They don't have the right upbringing. So if you can impart some of that on the leaders and them just allowing them to really take up the blinders, open their eyes and their hearts, and let these people speak and tell them their situations, there's going to be a connection there. Tanner, I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to touch a little bit on what Tom was saying earlier when we're talking about coaching people that have an emotional disconnection from their teams. You know, there's Jungian psychology. There's a lot of benefit in shadow work, right? Like most people don't take the time to go back and dig down deep and ask themselves the questions of why do I act the way that I do, right? And how do I become a more effective leader by looking at that? You know, Amin said it earlier. We train a lot of leaders, right? And we have a lot of people that we're trying to grow. And when we grow them, one of the most important things that we say to them is you have to show up for yourself first. You have to show up authentically for yourself first. Who are you trying to be? Right? And how do we help you be that? Something that's really powerful in my area of work is engagement, because you know, culinary arts is an entry-level position for a lot of people, right? They can get into our business really easily, you know, and especially after the pandemic, the absence of workers that we saw that left that workforce, now it's even easier for them to get in there. And there, to Amin's point, a lot of people come in carrying a lot of baggage, right? We all come into life carrying a lot of baggage, right? All of us. We all have experiences that shaped us and developed us, some of them positive, some of them negative, right? And so it's beholden on us as leaders, teaching and growing other leaders, to help recognize how we can take those uncomfortable situations and bring people to the table and let them know that they're supported and let them know that they can change who they are. They're not defined by their circumstances, you know, and that's where neuroplasticity has such a powerful effect, right? I mean, in my own personal story, I dealt with addiction, right? And being able to wrestle with that and overcome that through healthy ways, I've rewired my brain, right? I've changed how I look at things like that, you know, and now I can use that experience to help walk beside people. And I think that's so important, right? We have to walk hand in hand with people and let them know that they can change their lives. They can change the way they think about things. They're not defined by their past experiences. So.
Thanks for sharing, Tanner. That is such an important, humble sharing. There is so much addiction, and I've seen it in my family, and I think people forget that we're all addicted, and labeling addicts as addicted is a little bit silly. I've got my addictions. I come from a family of addicts as well in the traditional sense, but you know, technology has become an addiction, and you know, just the way we show up in the world is now completely limited. So the work that you're doing in the trade that you're in, the culinary, is so important, because I don't know, but you know, I've got a friend from that around, but cocaine is kind of like the main ingredient in many of the restaurant kitchens. So you know, power to you. Thank you for sharing that.
Great discussion there. Really, really cool. One of the things and I think they'll be the last topic for today, and we'll continue on. We're probably gonna have to do a part two. We didn't get through a lot of the information we wanted, but this is great discussion. So active listening and neural shaping. Active listening is probably one of the most important pieces of communication, because in communication, as a leader, one of the biggest pieces of that is, are you actually listening intentfully to your people? Or are you just one of those leaders that just speaks? So for example, the best leaders that I know, the best leaders that I've seen and I've researched on, and that are the most successful as well, when they go to a meeting, number one, they're the last ones to speak. They don't speak first. Number two, they're intentful in listening to everyone as everyone else speaks. So active listening is a dynamic and engaged form of listening. And with that, how is our brain being effective when we are actually doing active listening, when we're being intentful, sometimes repeating back what a person said just to be sure. Let's talk a little bit about that.
You evoked in me an experience about active listening. Before I learned neuroscience, I didn't realize how many thoughts are going in my head at one moment. And I think for me, that's the biggest challenge. In coaching, it's even tougher because you're sitting here, coaches will know this, and you're listening to somebody. You have to tune out all the things in your head about what's going on at home and, you know, the stresses about, like for me, I have double vision. So it's like, how can I manage my vision and coach to be able to do that? So the way I learned it through advanced neuroplasticity clinic was through, I had to be taught how to focus. And I think a lot of leaders don't realize that multitasking, the brain wasn't made for that. At least that's what I understand. So leaders have been developed completely backwards. So I like to bring in, Dr. Amin, I really like your point number 4, rewiring neural pathways, and then that deep listening. I like to do level 2 listening, which is leaning in so much. I explain it this way, that my wife and I are on the first date, and leaning in, I can't wait to hear what comes out of her mouth next. That kind of listening. But to teach leaders that, I think neuroscience is very helpful because I can bring in other tools like meditation and teach them how to do meditation and calm the brain down and feel what it's like to be focused. So active listening is a big thing for me. Thank you.
I think it also helps to encourage curiosity. And leaders, especially in today's VUCA Banny world, need to be more curious. And if you encourage that and this idea that you need to listen from a curiosity perspective as opposed to knowing what you're going to say next, that helps a lot. I was trained as a journalist. And so from that perspective, I've been really lucky because I didn't realize at the time, a lot of the skills I learned in journalism translate really well to coaching. But one of those is the curiosity and listening really deeply.
Yep. That's what the great Ted Lasso said. Be curious.
Yeah, I think that, the other thing that's difficult in when we're training leaders, especially to be active listeners, is that everything is so competitive now, right? Every leader is going in trying to be the best at absolutely everything that they do. And I bring a lot of culinary references in. Every kid that comes out of culinary school thinks they're going to be the next Gordon Ramsay, right? Well, there's only one Gordon Ramsay, and they all want to show off instead of take a moment, listen, reflect. I love what you said, Tom, about repeating back. Leaning in is so important. In our teams, the best way that we can engage them is those 5-minute meetings, right? Have a 5-minute meeting, get to know who they are, listen to them, take that information in, and then in the next conversation that you have with them, Show that you were intentional about what you heard from them. Bring up whatever they talked about, you know. If they say that they like pony dogs, right? Or they love punk rock music, you know, try and engage them in that way the next time you have a conversation with them. So, you know, you recommended this band to me. I went and listened to them. I really like this song, right? That gets that engagement piece where they're like, okay, I recognize that this person's actually listening to me. I can open up more. I can grow more with them. So active listening is it's so important.
Yeah, I think it's to your point, Tanner, because I do this all the time. I'm very intentful. And when I have conversations, is picking keywords that people say, and or to your point, Liz, being curious enough, it's like, well, I don't know about that. Let me go look at it. And I immediately start researching or reading about it. And then I get back to that person and be like, you know what? I like what you said. And I started reading up on it, and these are my thoughts. Wow, you should see their face just like glow when you do that. It is so profound.
I want to add to that too, that the other side of that is active questioning, right? It's interesting because if you're a CEO of the top leader in a company, and you have most of your other people from the field or the entry level and non-management in a room, there's not a lot to listen to because there's fear. Many of them aren't going to ask questions. So a strong leader not only can lean in and listen, but if they can be, some leaders believe that questions. So asking questions or storytelling to get somebody to build that, that oxytocin, that trust, where then, maybe the employee says, hey, I want to share with you, Mr. Leader, my story. So it's a combination of those two things for me.
Mr. Leader?
Yes.
Okay.
That's and you're so right in active questioning. You know, one of the best CEOs I ever worked with in my entire life, a lady named Allison Patt, CEO of Thomas Cuisine. She was so adept at asking questions to really pull the information out of you, right? She wasn't the one sitting there, you know, at her CEO desk saying, you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and this is the way it's going to go. She was, how is the best way for you to bring your best to this position and to our corporation? And how do we grow you as a leader, but how do we grow our company to have the best leaders out there? Active questioning is critical.
A lot of that I've been exploring this with Liz, and we've been looking at the dopamine pathway related to listening. And with many leaders, their ability or inability to listen deeply is driven by the fact that they're not getting a reward for active listening. So if you help them notice the dopamine pathway of the reward that they can get neuropsychologically by paying that attention, it kind of gets the ball rolling, and it gets them to pay attention of the feel-good factor when you connect in that Allison kind of way, and how that then ripples over into building that relationship, building that sense of intimate rapport, that oxytocin that then sustains that healthy relationship. So I think from what we've been speaking about, Liz, with the other people, is looking at how does this neuroscience around the plasticity of the neurotransmission, how does that actually hit the ground?
Yeah, and JJ,
when you're dealing with a leader.
Yeah, I just got a great insight from your comment there, because I worked with a woman who did a lot of communication training with leaders. And we worked together on helping leaders get basically, we didn't say it at the time, but it was a dopamine hit, because she advised every time you meet with somebody new, you've got two goals. You want to learn something about them, and you want to learn something from them. And so if you're listening for that,
that's so good.
Oh, got it. That's a nice little hit of dopamine. And both of those things help you build a relationship which is, again, going to be more dopamine hits when you make good connections.
I love that. That's being intentional right there, and being a better person and a great leader. All right,
Yeah,
so
that's so good.
we're almost at that time. So we're going to continue this. This is just the first iteration. We will be having these roundtables on a monthly basis. I can't wait to speak more on these topics with you. Make sure that we're all back and we bring someone with us. Let's grow this. Let's share the wealth of knowledge. So I'll give you a minute of time to each of you to give us some feedback and tell us what did you think about today and what can we do better for the next time.
Yeah, I just think this was a fantastic roundtable for an initial conversation. I think we really dug into some deep stuff, and I just can't wait to see what grows from this. So yeah, thank you all for letting me be a part of this.
Thanks, Hannah. Let me jump in quickly. I mean, this is really, really brilliant. I'd never thought of having these roundtables on the weekend would be a good idea, and you've built new pathways that I will never be able to change. So thank you for that brilliance. I love the idea of having this as a monthly event, having these conversations. Saturday is a perfect time. So for the NPN Hub members, this will be a great place for us to have dialogue. So let's make sure that we keep this place humming with such brilliant energy. So thank you all for showing up. I really enjoyed the time.
I'm going to back off because I've got a commitment. So
okay, take care, Liz.
Said you might be back.
Thanks.
Thank
Liz.
you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Dr. Amin. It's fascinating. Very helpful. Nice to meet you guys. And Tanner, you and I have a common thing here. I'm a home chef, and we could talk for hours about it. So look up Instagram, The Quiet Warrior Eats. All my pictures of my plates are up there. Love to chat with you.
Absolutely. I'll check it out.
Cody, I'm impressed with how many degrees and things you have, man. You look so young. It's like,
well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I have to drop off. Sorry, I have a junk removal team coming. So some spring cleaning happening here. So I will leave.
Thanks,
Dr.
Tom.
Amin, sorry, go ahead.
No, Indra, I'm just going to press the pause now. I think we finished.